Hey, welcome along to this Excel video. I have been working a lot recently in Google Sheets, and I have been working on longitudinal data for some medical practices. And something that I created as a part of one of the recent projects was to have a report that was flexible based upon the owner's preference. So it may be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 24 weeks, 36, 52, whatever you want. And I wanted to demonstrate that to you today. I'm pretty much starting from scratch. I have created a random data set. Don't get too caught up in what this data means, but hopefully it looks familiar. We've got a 1 to 10 sleep and stress rating. We've got an availability score, which means 0 unavailable, 1 available but modified training, and 2 fully available to train. The reason for that scale is that you can get an average for an athlete over a period of time that indicates their availability. Next column along is a hydration status. Now, unlike the previous column, I have used text in this one, so we cannot get an average score, but we can get some information to say whether an athlete is hydrated, marginal, or dehydrated. Final column is just an arbitrary unit training load. So let's get into this project. First thing that I would recommend we do is we convert this to a table. So I'm just going to click Insert Table, and I definitely want to have the top row become headers, so I'm just going to say yes to that. Next, I'm just going to call this table something really descriptive and simple. So I always use the prefix TBL for a Excel table, and then an underscore in data. So this is our data sheet. Next sheet to have a look at is the control panel sheet. If you've seen some of my projects before, you'll know this is what I like to do. So I'm going to select these names because we want to use this in a drop-down list. Now I could convert this to a table, or I could just do a named range, and that's the option that I'm going to go for. Again, something really descriptive. I'm just calling this list names. I always like to use the prefix list if I can. Alright, we're going to fill in this area shortly in a bit more detail. But let's first go to the report and start connecting a few things up. So this is the report that we want to populate. We want to allow the user of the report to select whether they want to show data by week, fortnight, 4 weeks, etc. But there's a few things we've got to do to get set up. I always like really being obvious to identify to a user what they need to do. At the moment we haven't given that instruction. I've written a name in there, but there's no functionality in this cell yet, so I'm going to go to data validation. We get the data validation pop-up. We choose list, and down here we can either type an equals sign and put the named range we just created in there, or if you're lucky to be on a PC, you can hit F3 and a little dialog box pops up and does that for us. If you're not on a PC or you can't get that to work, you can just simply type it and you get the same effect. So now we can pick a name from a list as we would expect to. Now I'm going to put a start date in here. I happen to know that the 6th of January was a Monday, and I like that. On my side of the world, 6/01/2020 refers to the 6th of January, not the 1st of June, so apologies if that's what you've got. I have put here next to it day, month, year, but this is something very easy to change. Now if we want to select the cycle length, then we need to go back to our control panel and set that up. So let's start really easy. Now you can do absolutely anything you like here, as long as you configure the table correctly. Now let's go ahead and finish this off. And so we've now got a few options there. Like I mentioned, you can complete this however you like. I am aware that there are people who do periodized cycles that aren't week in duration, so they might be 10 days, 11 days. That could be something you'd use here, but just kept it simple for now. So what I want to do is do two things. A named range here for the list of cycles. So once again, I prefix it with list just because it's easier and I'm used to doing it that way. List cycle. And then I'm going to select this whole lot. I could include the headers, but I don't need to. And I'm going to call this table cycle length. And so I mentioned before that I've got some practices that I follow all the time. Using list and table are two of those. Now when we go back to the report sheet, we can configure this last pick list. So once again, we're already on the data validation tab, but I can click data validation list and either hit F3 to give us the options that we can choose from, or I could just type equals list cycle, because that's the name that we put in place. So I'm going to put 2 weeks. And let's see how we go. Now, I've put 10 cycles in here. In some instances that won't work because there's no way there'll be 10 cycles of 26 weeks unless you've got a massive data set. But it's good to demonstrate the different options. So first cycle will always start on the date that you've entered up here. So as you can see in the formula bar, it says equal A3. Now you get this weird number. If you're not familiar with that, that is the way Excel sees dates. This is the number of days since the 1st of the 1st, 1900. Excel believes that was day one. And it allows you to do calculations with days and times. There has been 43,836 days between this date and that date, and so that's how that number works out. It's just a formatting thing. If you choose short date from the format option, everything will work out just fine. Now what we want to be able to do is have the next cycle be 2 weeks after the first one, and so the way to do that is relatively simple. You simply go like that, equals B7 plus. Now we could do an index match, or we could do VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is easier, so I'm going to choose that option. As soon as I type VL, the formula bar guesses what I want to do, and it starts to give me some help. So I hit tab and it opens the brackets up for me. What do we want to look up? We want to look up whatever is here. If I hit the F4 key, it puts dollar signs around it. If you can't do that, you can manually put dollar signs around the A and the 4. If you do that, this means the formula can be pulled and dragged anywhere you like, and it'll still stay locked on that A4. So what do we want to look up? We want to look up whatever our selected cycle length is. Where do we want to look it up? Table cycle length. The reason I always use those prefixes is when I start typing table, anything that I've named that way pops up and I can just pick the one that I want. It's only a 2-column table. We want an exact match. And so now I can hit enter and it's going to be 2 weeks in advance. Let's just check that, make it 1 week, 12 weeks. Magic. Cool. And so when I pull this across, aside from not fitting, which I can fix, that has sorted itself out really nicely. 1 week, 4 weeks. And so what's awesome is that now we've got dates that we can leverage formulas from. And so we've got our table, it's called TBL data, and what I can do is just do an average if. So it's a fairly easy process. I actually need to do average ifs. If you type average, you can see there's a few options that present themselves, but we want average ifs because we've got more than one criteria. What is our average range? If I type TBL, we can see again the value of using consistency. TBL data appears and I hit tab to accept that. When I hit the square bracket, it pulls up all of the column headings inside that table. I want sleep rating. So we're now sorted for our average range. Let's do the criteria range. We have actually got 3 criteria. First criteria is the name of the athlete. That should equal the name in A2. Next criteria is date. It's a bit trickier now because we're using a text operator, so this greater than. We need to put it inside quotes. We're actually doing greater than or equal to. We point to this cell here. As we drag and pull this formula across, we want it to be stuck always on row 7, but we don't want the B to be fixed because we want, as we copy across, we want it to look for the date above rather than be stuck on B7. Now I could either just copy and paste that for our third criteria, or I could just type it again. It's good practice to do it again. This time we want it to be less than. We don't need the equal sign this time. I could click on that. That would work. That would give us the correct date. And that would be great all the way up until cycle 10, when there's actually no date in L7 for us to leverage off. So what I'm going to do is simply click on that. And do that same VLOOKUP we just did before. And so when I hit that last brackets, we can see that the formula tip has disappeared. That means it thinks it's done, and I can hit enter. Got an average of a lot of numbers here, so it's not surprising we got a decimal. I would prefer to put that as a number. 1 decimal place most likely. You might want it different, but I think 1 decimal place is good. Now if I copy that and I paste it next door, what I want to do is just have a little look and see if it has updated. When I click inside the formula bar on a PC, you can see that the colors are there to help us. A2 is highlighted, the 4 weeks is highlighted, and we can see that it has moved along a date to cycle 2's date, so that is perfect. I'll just show you one thing to be wary of. If I drag this to the right, it gives me an error, whereas if I copy it and paste it, it doesn't give me an error. Now you think that would be the same, that if you dragged or copied and pasted it would work alright. I'll just drag again so we can see what's going on. If you can look inside the cell that's got the error, what we'll see is that by dragging to the right, what Excel has done is it has dragged all of these field headings, this one, this one, this one, and this one, it's dragged them one to the right as well. So it's trying to find a date in the sleep rating column. It's trying to find an athlete name in the date column. And it's no longer now looking at sleep rating, it's looking at stress rating. So there's another way to solve that allows you to drag, but it makes the formulas really big. You have to essentially double up the column headings as you pull across. But I've now moved to a method where I simply just copy and I select all the cells I want and I click paste, and it works great. It doesn't do those updates for me. We can see that if I just randomly pick one, that it has correctly lined everything up. So what I'm going to do now is same thing. I'm going to copy and paste that down. The only thing I need to change here is the average column, and that is now stress rating. Copy, paste. Availability, same thing. We can simply change that field, everything else stays the same. Copy, paste. Hydration status is an interesting one because it's text. I'm just going to leave that for a second. Now I'm going to do the training load. We can't do an average for this one because that will be massively impacted on by the number of sessions that have been held. What I would prefer to do would be SUMIFS. And if we do SUMIFS, can't forget to change the availability column to training load. And you'll get some big numbers, but what this is about is comparing. So as I paste across, what we can do is, at a glance and using a chart, we can compare the training loads over whatever it is, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 weeks. I've got about a year's worth of data in that data set, just over, so we can see that even when I select 6 weeks, it can populate all 10 columns of this report. Now the hydration status one is interesting. There's a couple of things we could do. We won't be able to chart anything, but we could do some interesting things such as counting. So let's do that. I'm going to change it to count if. Now what I have to be careful of is to get all my criteria correct. I'm going to change availability to hydration status, but the next thing it wants is a criteria for one, so we don't have that. So what I've got now is a 4 criteria count if. It is looking for the number of times that hydration status says dehydrated for this name in this date range. And that's something. If I copy that, I can paste it across, and that gives us some value to say how many times were they dehydrated in that time period. These are the things that I'm now going to have a look at. Let's create a dynamic chart. The easiest way to create a dynamic chart is just to extract the row that you want to chart, hide that row by putting a chart over the top, something like that. So let's set that up. Something like that. Select chart variable, make it red. Now we could we've done this a couple of times already. Instead of putting in a name range, I could just say, you know what, I want all of this stuff to be charted. and happy days. We can pick what we want and we're in business. We're always going to be plotting those dates now, so all we have to do is get a lookup sorted, and we want to put it in a place where it's going to be hidden under the chart. So let's try that now. We could use VLOOKUP, why not? We want to VLOOKUP whatever has been selected. Lock that cell down. Where's the table that we want to look it up? Well, it's there. We could select the headings or not in that selection, it doesn't matter. What column index number do we want? Well, at the moment we want column number 2, and we're sorted. Now I could, and when I was early in my Excel career, I would drag that across and change that manually to 3 and keep going all the way along until I was done. Now there's a couple of ways you can do it. I could do a little helper up the top like that and decide that, well, actually it's going to be hidden anyway, it doesn't matter. So in that case I would simply remove the 2, click on that cell and drag it across, and that would work just fine and correctly pull out the numbers that we want to chart. But I don't like that too much. I prefer using a function called columns, where it counts the number of columns and passes that into the formula. Now if I lock A now, it'll drag that across and we can get rid of those numbers without being in trouble. If I go back home, dial that right down, we're now good to do our chart. I'm just going to select those cells, insert either a column or a line. Technically we should use a line because it's time series. Columns always look way better. Alright, so a few things to do to this chart. Click on the title, go up to the formula bar, click equals. So now this will adjust. That's great. You can see it happening, so that's cool. Alright, the next thing we need to do is right click, choose select data, and let's put our date labels in. I want to format the data series and just change that gap width. I tend to go for about 100, and you could add data labels if you like. So what we've got now, dynamic chart, moves and jumps and bounces about. What I've noticed is that we need to do a little tweak of this axis setting. At the moment it's trying to figure out what we want, and it's got a date, so it assumes we want every day to be plotted. If I change that to text, then the chart will stay a little bit more uniform. Let's try it out. Awesome. Okay, one more little thing I want to do, highlight in the table the row that we have selected. So I'm going to select all of these cells. We want to go to conditional formatting, choose new rule. We want to write a formula to determine which cells to format. Now this isn't for the faint-hearted. You don't get any help when you use formulas inside conditional formatting, so you have to be pretty confident with your formula writing. Now, this should work. Let's just see. pick any colour. This will do for now. If I click OK here, hopefully the entire row of the table that matches our selection will highlight. Brilliant. Okay, so we now can select it and it shows up. So I'm just going to make a bit of formatting here, not too much. So we've got a little bit of a report set up now where we've used a couple of tricks to extract data. We can change whether we want it to be 1 week, 2 week, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and everything just adjusts. Now as we get beyond 6 weeks, we'll find that the far right hand columns of the table don't give us any information. So there's a few things we could do to protect against that, but for now I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm guessing you guys get the message of this. This is like I say, a trick I've been using a lot in a recent Google Sheets project, and I figured it would have some really good applications for people that are interested in tracking whether people are getting better month by month, week by week, and so on. If you want a copy of this file, just let me know. Mention file 108 in your email and I'll directly send it through. So hope you enjoyed the trick. I'll be back soon with another one, I hope. Thanks.